because we had hit 20 and everybody's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Let's do more. Because what was really impressive is when we got close to 5, we had that like, what if? But when we got to 20, it was the same thing. I mean, we just 4x'd from like 5 to 20. This is amazing. But it was still like, hold on, this is not gonna get us to 50. We needed to reinvent ourselves again.
Today's episode is about what got you here doesn't get you there in the context of revenue growth. Or in other words, what gets you from 0 to 1 million is vastly different to what then gets you to 3 million, which is different to 10 million, 20 million, and 50 million. Meaning that for every step along the T2, T3, so triple revenue from the first 2 years after hitting 1 million, double it for the 3 years after, you have to completely reinvent yourself on the go-to-market side every single time, both from a strategy as well as from a people perspective. Our guest today has done this journey multiple times. Russ Thau is a former founder and seasoned revenue leader whose specialty is going from 1 million to 50 million in revenue. This includes growing revenue at Intercom and Envoy from low single-digit millions to over 25 million, as well as increasing revenue at SuccessFactors and Box from 10 million to over 150 million, resulting in 2 IPOs. On top, he's advised and worked with companies such as Airtable and LaunchDarkly since they were sub-1 million in revenue. With that, welcome Russ. It's wonderful to have you on. Let's jump straight in, as you have many war stories, lessons and failures to share from your time at startups such as Box, Intercom, Envoy, around how to get to 1 million, 3 million, 10 million, 20 million, and even 50 million in revenue. We'll divide our conversation into 2 parts. First, we'll talk through how the strategy needs to change along each step before diving into implications on hiring along the way as well. All right, so let's start. What do I need to know from a strategy perspective about going from 0 to my first million in revenue?
You know, that was the one part of my journey that I didn't actually accomplish. So when I started my own company, Red J, we didn't actually hit 1. And what I have, let's start with what I've seen as successful as the companies you mentioned, like Intercom, Box, Envoy, that didn't make it through, is it's really just about doing everything. The 0 to 1 is all about the founder. It's all about trying so many different things. It's all about experimenting. It's all making sure you really have something. And I have great respect for all the founders now, especially having tried to do it myself. And I think the lesson that I learned, and so one of the things that happens too is I will work with a lot of founders. So I will advise and consult with people that are in that sub 1 million stage. And what I typically say is you don't need to be a good salesperson at sub 1, because what people are buying is they're buying you. They want to know more about you. And I think the best signal is you're solving a true pain. Because that's one thing I learned in my journey is I was like, great, I was selling people. And so people were like, this is great. But then they go to use it and they didn't use it. Like it didn't stick. Whereas I think what makes founders so great is they're really thinking like product people. They're really thinking all the way across and making sure they're truly solving a pain and getting that usage. And you just, 0 to 1 is nuts. You just gotta do everything and try everything and just keep going. And it always just takes longer than you think it's gonna take. Nothing just like hits. As many stories as you hear from the origins, if you really were to go back, none of those people really just hit from the very beginning.
That makes total sense. And maybe, right, let's kind of jump into the next step before we kind of come back and talk about some of the major differences. But right now I cross into kind of the $1 million revenue mark. What changes now from trying everything, seeing what sticks, experimenting, and it kind of basically just being the founder, going out there with mainly their product, mainly with their credibility and the product?
Yeah, I think once you cross 1, it's you have something. We're not talking you've nailed it, but that's the first signal that you have something. And what needs to change then, that's counterintuitive to everything you've done to get to 1, is now you need to go really narrow. And what I see is too many founders were like, well, I was doing all the things. Let's keep doing all the things and let's just do it harder. Whereas once you get past that first milestone and where somebody like me comes in and what I've seen, and they've written a ton of books about this. One of my favorite books is Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm in His Adoption Curve, is the goal of sales, the goal of markets is you're trying to get a herd to move. And now that you've experimented and you've found some fit, it's really where's your best fit. People call this the ideal customer profile. In the Jeffrey Moore, people call it, you got to go after that head pin. You got to find the beachhead. There's so many different names. But the point being is, what you have to do is find that segment. What types of companies and who are the personas in there that you're really going to focus on? Because like what I always say is, what you're really trying to do at this point is sell to the role models. So when you go and say Intercom is a customer, people are going to want to be like Intercom. And so that's going to get you more customers. So anytime you do that, the segment is going to follow the role model. And then the persona, and when I say persona, there's the buyer, there's the user, there's your champion, you got to pick which one of those you're going after. And I'll give you a good example. So what Intercom did very well is, so you think about it, they were grinding. They were doing everything, just begging people to use their product. But once they found some fit, they realized the fit were companies exactly like them. Were product forward startups who really cared about the customer experience. And it was really the founders. And so they really just leaned into that. They had a very well-read blog. The product was absolutely built for a founder that could just install a JavaScript into the product. They really locked into that. And that gave them a really narrow ICP and allowed them to build that herd, allowed them to really nail some role model companies in the beginning. So when you saw it, people are like, oh my God, I want to be just like that company. And so they just did a really good job of getting that momentum going.
That's fascinating. I think a couple threads to pull on. Maybe first one being, right, you're a founder, you're kind of trying to get to your first million, you have 10, 15, 20 different types of customers, 10, 20 different customers, probably a bunch of different types of companies. You work with founders a bunch at that stage, right? What do I look out for? How do I figure out whom to focus on, right? Because that's a big bet that you're taking with regard to your next couple months, because you're always on the clock.
Yeah. So once you get to 1 million, there's a couple things to consider. One is what's going to be a big enough TAM? What's going to be a big enough total addressable market that's going to get me to 10 million? So you might have oh my God, all these really small companies love us, but there's not enough of them. It's a little too small. So that's the first thing you have to consider is there enough of these companies that's going to get me to 10 million? You don't have to be thinking a billion at that point in time. You just got to go, hey, is there enough of these that I could see my way to 3 million? Maybe I see my way to 10 million. And then what I always say is, which one of them are loving it the most? And one of the signals I look for is, which is the first one of your customers that tells their friends about it? And that friend comes inbound. And they're like, please, I want to learn more about this. So I do use that demand as a signal at that early point in time, is you could see some repeatability and you could see some love. And I say, okay, that's the one we have to go after. Because there might be oh, this could be a bigger TAM, but you're going to have to push harder into it. And I would say that's probably not the one you want to go after when you're at 1. You want to go after the one where you're truly solving a pain that's going to give you some credibility. It's going to give you some momentum.
That makes sense. So 10 doesn't sound like a huge number, right? Especially from a kind of a revenue TAM perspective. What's a TAM that's almost too small, even at that $10 million number, versus kind of one that is specific enough yet large enough that you can go out and hit that 10 million number?
Yeah, I think if you're only finding one in a couple of millions, if you're seeing something less than 5, and I'm using these, everybody thinks, oh my God, I have to find $1 billion plus market. It's like, not at the very beginning. You don't. But I do think maybe you've found something that solves a problem. I don't have a good example off the top of my head. And, some of the companies I've advised is like, they find this is a great fit for a very narrow, like 5 customers, like a very specific segment and a very specific persona. Because what you have to look after is this person, because in the adoption curve, you're typically going to be selling to the innovators. And so is this person just a tinkerer? Let's say it's like way back in the day at SuccessFactors, I sold HR software, which are not typically your early adopters. And are you finding HR leaders that are a rare breed? So maybe they're so innovative that there's only 5 of them out there. So like, is there enough of that person? Or have you found a company that's like the only one that's doing EV charging in like San Francisco or something? So there is like, you want to start narrow, but you don't want to go too narrow. It's a fine dance because, like you said, I see too many of these startups that they're like, we have to boil the ocean and be everything to everybody, and we need a massive TAM. It's like, no, you don't. You just need some credibility first.
That was going to be my next question. It's like, okay, how narrow is narrow enough versus not going too broad and kind of risking boiling the ocean at that point?
You have limited resources, you have limited time. And I do think what happens a lot to founders that with my go-to-market brain is you have to remember markets are herds. So are you getting a role model that's going to allow you to get more companies exactly like that? That's your like main goal at one, is be very narrow. You're going to find somebody that loves you that's going to tell their friends about it. And then also when you tell somebody else that Intercom's a customer, they're going to go, oh, that just piqued my interest. I want to be like them too. Like that's all you're really trying to do at that like 1 to 3.
Do you have kind of any sort of frameworks or any kind of structure with regard to how you think about, okay, how do I actually define an audience that is actually narrow enough? Or give us an example from one of your prior companies, what a narrow enough audience looks like kind of once you get into that $1 million revenue territory.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Well, let's stick with Intercom. And what was nice about Intercom is we were going after like sub 20, sub 50 employee startups. And what also made that great from a go-to-market perspective is we were attracting the founders. Is the founder, and so that gave us, so from a segment, it's like, great. We were looking at really B2B SaaS startups that were more had like a self-service motion in their product. Had some type of, this was back in the day, there was no PLG. We just called it self-service or freemium. And those type of companies were a great fit. And because that's what Intercom was. So what made it unique is we knew it's like, great, we're going after B2B SaaS startups with a self-service motion. And we're going after the founder. So that meant like there was power there. Like that was the person who would come in, install the JavaScript, be like, this is great, and then just put a credit card down. And it's like that so like talk. And what was even more unique is those people were just like us. And so we're like, well, we understand us, and now we're building for other people like us. And that allowed us to be very specific and build something that people really started to love. There was word of mouth, but then also you saw the product and those role model people's company and their product.
And so kind of a maybe a bit more of a general advice is in startups is an audience a lot of other startups go after, but maybe more generally, right? If you have a type of customer that loves your product, try to find the next 10, 20, 50 that are as close to this one as possible. Basically, rather than hedge your bets at this point, kind of fully focus on those and try to rinse and repeat as much as you can.
Yeah, rinse and repeat. And I think there's a ton of frameworks out there, and I could go through a bunch, but like what all I think about is a segment. And when I say segment, it's a type of company that you could like group these companies together and they're all trying to do a similar goal. And then I think about a persona, and I know you didn't ask this, but I'm gonna kind of move beyond the 3 million stage, because the story at Intercom is that's what got them to 1. So I wasn't there yet, and they had nailed it. And the point of bringing me in as sales was, can we, like, now we've hit 1, how are we going to hit 3? How do we hit 5? And what I came in and did is our self-service motion was designed around those founders. But what I noticed, and the company noticed, was we had a lot of people that would come through the self-service motion and then abandon. And those people happened to be marketers. Those people were not people that could just install a JavaScript. They weren't the founder. And I just started talking to those people. And all they wanted to do was like just talk to a human, make sure it was like what they thought it was before they asked somebody technical to install it in the product. And now all of a sudden we started widening up. We just widened up the persona. It was the same segment, but like the founder was just great. But now all of a sudden we started talking to this marketer, this like growth marketer, this person that's like, this thing is amazing, I want to start using it. They might even came from the support side. And that this was now a persona that a human was talking to. And that really started opening up like the next revenue stream.
Which makes a lot of sense, right? So you kind of, when we talk about you get to 1, at 1, you very meaningfully narrow down your segment, the type of company, the persona. And ideally that gets you to 3 million kind of in around 12 months. Once you hit the 3 million, right, things start to change. And you don't need to kind of keep pushing more narrow, but actually rather, and that's what you did with Intercom, because you started to notice additional pull. That's when you start to go a little bit broader again. Can you kind of walk me through how to think about, okay, now you're at let's say $3 to $5 million in revenue. How do I think about this stage?
Yeah, let's move on to an Envoy example. I'm not sure if everybody knows Envoy, but that's it used to be a visitor management system, meaning an iPad that sat in the lobby. And Envoy got to like 5 pretty fast, because they just did an amazing job, once again, selling to like Bay Area companies who really cared about the experience in their lobby. Do you want a paper logbook, or do you want this really nice looking iPad that does the same thing? It was like a no-brainer. But then what happened is like, how are you going to go like from 5 to 20 million? There's only so many of these startups in the Bay Area and New York, as you really have to widen it out. And I think what also happens too, if you think about just the actual numbers, right? If I'm going 1 to 3, I just got to find 2 million that year. It's not that hard. You just got to find 2, so that's why you be more specific. But now if I'm going 3 to 9, I got to go find 6 million. I got to go find 6 million of new revenue in that 1 year. And typically what that means is and then if you do a visual, and like Jeffrey Moore does this, is so if you think at the very beginning, you're finding that 1 headpin. But now if you really think you're going 3 to 9, is like you need the 2, the next 2 after. And that's either going to mean you're widening. What this typically means, but what I've seen, is you widen up your segment. So at the Envoy example, or you could kind of widen up your persona. But at Envoy, we widened up our segment. And what that looked like is we were selling to a bunch of like forward-looking startup-y companies in the Bay Area. But what we realized is there was a but where the big dollars could come from, and the companies that were paying us the most money, is they were buying it for security. Is that visitors were a huge security threat in your office. And that if we could go to people where intellectual property was key within their office, think like video studios, game studios, like semiconductor companies, you'd be surprised, even huge like manufacturing plants. I won't get into these massive tangents, but like where you really think intellectual property is so key. And all of a sudden it went from, hey, this is cool, to, look, it's cool, but we actually really help you secure those visitors in the office. And then our price point, I think we like 4x'd like the deal size as we went to more of that messaging, as we widened up into like a new segment, which was like the bigger companies who cared more about security in their office. And like even what happened there is we went from selling to like an office manager to a facilities manager, meaning this was somebody whose job, they typically came from law enforcement, something like that, because their job was to secure the premise. So all of a sudden, it just became a little bit of an extension where we could do 4x bigger deals. And then that got like the next like herd moving.
That's fascinating, right? Kind of in the last stage, kind of getting from 1 to 3, the biggest mistake that you can make is not go narrow enough and basically spread too thin. What's kind of the main challenges that come with this stage and kind of the main mistakes that you see people do as they kind of enter into this $3 to $5 million revenue territory?
Yeah. What I see is people think they made it.
Yeah.
People will still be like, okay, well, let's just like open this thing up. And it's like, no, you still have to, 3 to 9 is a big year. But then what happens is, so this happened at Intercom, is we actually went 1 to 5. Like that was a pretty good year. And then everybody's like, and I give a huge credit. One of the best memories I have of Intercom was Owen called us in on a Sunday. And he's like, okay, because we had just gone 1 to 3, but we still had like 4 months left in the year. And he's like, could we get to 5? And it was such a great exercise. And because this answers your question of what I see is too many people when they're in the 3 to 9, they're like, let's just do more of that. Like we've made it. Let's turn on the process. Let's turn on let's get the wheel cranking. Whereas at Intercom, it was, this is great. What could we do to really open this thing up? And so on a Sunday, we just brainstormed all these crazy, we're like, what if we did that? And the outcome of that meeting was, what if we unbundle the product and change our pricing and packaging? Is like, this has been great, but we think there's like so much more value in the product. And we think people are perceiving it differently. It was a pretty big bet, especially like you were in the triple double. And what that actually did is it led us to, we finished at 5 and then it carried us into the next year from 5 to 20. But I bring that up because it was kind of the same thing at Envoy too. As we were starting to approach 10, and to answer your question specifically, is I see too many people now, everybody does the like premature scaling. It's like, I've hit 3, we've totally made it. And it's like, no, you probably haven't. And as you get closer to 10, because now if you think about it, now you're probably going to have to bring in like 10 million of new in 1 year, which is still like big. So you're probably going to have to be agile and think about how do you maybe move to that third rung? How do you now like really widen this thing up? And then once you get closer to 10 is when you have to start thinking about, okay, we probably have like managers, we probably have like a lot of people. We should probably think about some repeatability, some process, some type of scale. But you still got to stay agile because we'll stick with the Intercom example. He didn't ask this, but it's still the same thing. Is that moment hit us at Intercom when we hit 20? Because we had hit 20 and everybody's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Let's do more. Because what was really impressive is when we got close to 5, we had that like, what if? But when we got to 20, it was the same thing. I mean, we just 4x'd from like 5 to 20. This is amazing. But it was still like, hold on. This is not going to get us to 50. We needed to reinvent ourselves again. And at that point in time, we're like, how are we going to start doing bigger? Like, we need to figure out how to get to bigger transactions. And so what does that look like? So we started introducing new products. We started finding like, companies with more users. We experimented with going like up market. It was like, we can't just rest on the fact. And even like on the sales side, we took out like the really small customers, but we just kept the agility. We kept the experimenting, even though like all the advice you typically hear is like, well, just do more of that.
That makes sense and fascinating, right? So we had kind of 1 to 3 very narrowed down very meaningfully. Then 3 to 10, you widen it up. Now, or kind of similar question to how much you have to narrow it to get from 1 to 3 is like, how wide do you go from 3 to 10, and what is too wide at that stage, because again, right here, and that's the premature scaling to the degree, you run into the risk of going too wide and doing a little bit of everything for no one at that point.
Exactly. And I've advised companies, and I've just seen it in my journey and heard it, is you think if that little thing is working, it's time, like, let's introduce a bunch of new products. Let's hire a bunch of more people. And the challenge is, because if you were smart from 1 to 3, you picked a small TAM to go nail, and you really got to go nail that. But sometimes people overestimate the size of that like initial TAM, and then you've overscaled like on a people side. Or exactly as you think, oh my God, we've got this. Let's now like boil the ocean. And you realize now you're dealing with too many segments. And when I talk about segments, it's like they'll try and go into new verticals. They're like, oh my God, this person says they have this use case. We should totally do this. It's like, you don't understand. Like from a go-to-market, you now have to talk about it differently. From a product, you're going to have to do more features. You're going to now have to educate salespeople on how to do that. The actual like opportunity cost is just huge. But people think, well, we have to hit big numbers, so we have to start doing like more. What you really, and I think the bowling pin like visual is always the best, is like you hit the one head, now you get the 2. And so you think like you're just really extending like a persona or a segment, and you're just gradually moving over into that one. So you're making sure like whatever you're building is working for everybody. And however you're training your reps, like it's not too much to learn. And whenever you have like your marketing message, it's like, it's just a little extension of, because you forget like you're educating a market and people never move as fast as you. And the innovators loved you. Your early adopters now are like, okay, this is kind of interesting, but now you got to start speaking to them. And then there's a million different examples. Like, when do you cross the chasm? When are you actually getting to the pragmatists? And those are the people like where everything really opens up, because the pragmatists are the majority. That's really 70% of the market. But did you try to go to them too soon where you didn't have enough credibility like built in yet? And to get to them, like you basically now have to beachhead into like new personas, new segments. And that like, what that starts to look like is almost what you did when you were at 1 to 3. You just have to do a lot in parallel.
That makes sense, right? And so that will get you to kind of, the 2 will get you to 10. At 10, you may add a third, a fourth, but kind of maybe walk me through, that's a great segue, walk me through what changes now, right? You cross into the double-digit revenue runway rate. How do I think about getting to the next, no, not at the triple anymore, but to the next doubles, I get to 20 in the next 12 months?
Yeah, and this was the fun run. I'll use different examples now. Is I joined a company called Success Factors a long time ago at about 10 million. And I was brought in because what got us to 10 million was selling to large enterprises. And they knew that was going to be a good business, but they needed to get more of a herd moving. They needed to get more credibility. They just needed to get more people talking and using the product. So they launched an SMB segment, and that's where I came in. I did sales for that SMB segment. So if you think about that, was a move from the initial segments to, we're not abandoning our enterprise segment, but we really need to figure out how to address this SMB segment. And there was so many trials and tribulations going through that, because this is why I said everybody underestimates how much effort that takes. So once we were over at 10, we went and raised more money. We staffed SMB differently because the enterprise product didn't totally work for the SMB customer. We actually had to take a bunch of features out. And then the way you talk to an enterprise customer was much different, because an enterprise customer cares about succession planning, which means when people leave their jobs, whereas an SMB is like, what do you talk about? I'm just caring about survival. So now, how do I like talk to those customers differently? It becomes a big messaging change. And then even the way you demo, there was like a huge difference as we built out that SMB segment alongside the enterprise. And some people will like not do that because it is so hard, but we pulled it off at Success Factors. And the second example is that Box, and this is what people forget, is that Box got to about 20 million in revenue by selling. I remember sitting in this meeting, we put this up on the board, is 80% of our revenue came from companies who had 100 employees or less. And they were just like tripping over themselves to come and buy Box. So like the revenue was really starting to accelerate. But it was clear that some of those, like the best customers were the enterprise ones, like the bigger companies. And it became basically, let's bet the company on going enterprise. Like, we're not going to abandon the SMB segment, but we're going to take our best people and we're going to build out an enterprise segment. Kind of similar to what happened at Success Factors, except we went up market. And that took a while. Same thing. It took a while too. How do you talk to them? How do you address? And then how do you position themselves? And it was, it was interesting. And then if you really think about it at that point, though, is it was a big bet, because now if you got to go 20 to 50, is you really now got to go 30 million in a year. And so strategically speaking, those two companies did it. And that's the only ones I can really speak to, is they did it by really moving into new segments. Whereas at Intercom, we started to do it by adding more products. Like, it became more products into our like kind of core segment and persona.
There's a lot happening at that stage. So let's kind of first do 10 to 20, then 20 to 50. But there's a lot happening at that stage. Right at 10, once you get to roughly 10, you start to broaden. You've broadened your scope, right? You're starting to hire more people. You're potentially changing what segments you're going after. The way you put it is right. It's typically chaos at that point. And this is where you now have to like really put processes in place and really kind of think about, okay, how do I scale? I said to get from 10 to 20 and then from 20 to 50 and beyond. Maybe walk me through how are you thinking about first the 10 to 20 stage in terms of putting processes in place, right? Kind of scaling, setting up the organization for success.
Yeah, I'll give you a lesson learned. So at Intercom, I was a first-time VP, made all the first-time VP mistakes, and we were just running on adrenaline. I was hiring really smart people. I think I did a really good job of hiring, but we were just running by the seat of our pants. I was like the Salesforce admin until we hit like 20 million. I was like making changes, and we just onboarded people. We're like, just sit next to those people who know what they're doing, and hopefully you'll just learn. We called it tribal. It just totally blew up. And the biggest lesson I learned, I think what's very nice is, we did it too long. It allowed us to be very agile. It did. I see too many people think like you got to have so much process in place. But when you're sub 2 million, you're probably reinventing yourself like every year. So you spend a bunch of time developing all this process and systems and everything. You're like, yeah, let's go break that. Because you don't want to be hindered by that. You have to be agile. So I want to be clear, like you should have a CRM and you should know, like you should have a playbook, but don't overly engineer like all your systems, because you have to stay very agile. Whereas when you get to 10, the size of the team, so what I fixed is when I went to Envoy, which was sub 10, my first hire was a sales ops person. As Anna had joined me, and I had made her sales ops person at Intercom. And so she had lived it. And I was like, Anna, guess what? You're the first person I'm hiring. You got to come over here and help me. So the first thing I did was make sure I had a really good like right-hand person that was thinking about the most important thing is you have to stay agile, but you're hiring so many people. And the onboarding becomes so critical, because if I can onboard people a month faster, if like it just makes such an impact in revenue. And so that's where you got to have some process. They got to be able to like get onto a system, know what they're doing. They have some accounts. There's like a good sense of alignment. So that is why what I say is like, don't over engineer anything until you're like 9 to 10.
These are kind of roughly, or these are pretty arbitrary.
So yeah, they numbers kind of ultimately,
right? But kind of it probably falls in that ballpark range. But what are signals if I'm a founder or kind of a sales lead of a company? What are signals that I now need to heavily invest in processes and systems to actually be able to make it to kind of the 20 and beyond?
Yeah, you're gonna see. I mean, you're gonna see it in revenue growth. I think what we used to look for, like if you're over 10% month over month revenue growth, you're definitely ready to light this candle. And the other thing you're gonna see it though is in people, because no matter what, you use revenue because at a certain size, like I'm gonna have to hire people. I'm gonna have our AEs, and AEs gonna be reporting to me. I'm like, I'm gonna need managers now. So now I need to hire some managers, and like maybe so now I have all these managers, and then I maybe need a sales ops person. So all of a sudden, like I just have, I think they say it's like once you get over like 10 people on your team and you have a layer in there, it's like you need some process. You just need some process. And what I also say that's harder to quantify is you have good chaos.
What's the difference between good chaos and bad chaos?
Well, things start breaking. Like at Intercom, we had reps. There was one year I had 3 reps doing 300% of their number. And I had reps saying like, you need to hire more people. Like, and just there's 2, we weren't getting back to customers like perfectly. Like there were leads like that were dropping. And it's like, oh my God, like how do we just miss somebody who wants to buy our product? Like that's ridiculous. And you'll just find it from a time standpoint too, of like you're cutting corners. You're not doing the best prep for a call. You're not doing the best follow up. So your time gets crunched. And I say that's like good chaos, but that just tells you like you've pushed through a stage. If you need more of the process to understand which of those good leads, make sure you get them. You need to like, what's very important too that I didn't bring up is you need to start understanding your productivity per rep. And I'll save that for another day because that's like a whole other conversation, how you figure that out in the early days and like the signals you look for. But what's very important in the early days and knowing when like good chaos is coming is what is that leading indicator? Because I typically use some top of the funnel and like when is their time crunched? Like meaning like how many calls can they take in a day? Like how many leads can they truly process? So once you start tipping over that, is like things are breaking in a good way. So now I need to hire people. And then also like you just look at too from a sales standpoint, like in the early days, you could push like 10-to-1 ratios of like 10 people to 1 manager. At Box, I managed like 15 to 16 people for a whole year because we were just
Well,
moving so fast. Uh, and you'll just like, the good chaos too is like at Intercom and even Envoy, I worked people pretty hard in a good way that they were just like, you have to hire more people. They're just like, this is crazy. Like, I can't keep up. I'm making a ton of money and this is great, but you have to like do more here.
makes a lot of sense now, right? If I'm a kind of a startup revenue leader and I join in a new role, we hit 9 million in revenue. What are my, let's say, top 5 things that I put on my to-do list to typically figure out as soon as possible at that stage of company building?
Yeah, I'd say it's very much that rep productivity, like understanding that. I also think what's very important too, as you have process, is you need to get very good at alignment. Is like, do people understand the vision? Like, do people understand, like, being able to rally a team and get very good alignment is like everything. I see you're trying to ask a question. What do you want?
Yeah, no, like, how do you measure alignment, right? Because it sounds like a very generic term. Like, how do I know that they're actually aligned?
Yeah, it is very generic. And so here's where I'd start from that I'd put in this list too for this 9 million revenue leader is like, you got to have your productivity metric. You also have to have the profile of your reps. Like what type of rep seems to do well with your like ideal customer profile. You need to have some sense of why are your reps successful. There's some metrics, but there's also probably some unique skill set or there's some unique characteristics of that rep. And then you need to start building some rituals. And what I mean by rituals is like, how do you celebrate your wins? How do you celebrate your losses? How do you get feedback? You know, what is the weekly like cadence that you're getting people together? And then alignment, how I really define alignment is you're going to make hiring mistakes. Alignment and culture are kind of the same thing. But the way I really define it, and I had this at Intercom and Envoy, is when you make hiring mistakes, how quickly does the team point it out?
Yeah.
It basically is they will push the person out. And because they're like, that person is not aligned with our vision, that person's not aligned with how we do sales here, they don't fit in. And then, of course, it's my job to make the decision and everything. But and you'll find the team brings it up in very polite ways. They don't just come to you and be like, you need to fire that person. But the fact that they'll even start bringing it up, and I see that as alignment. I see that as like, I have a culture set. And then, what does alignment look like too? It's like they're bringing all their friends over. They're really telling all their people, like, you got to come over here. Like, this thing's something special. And I also find alignment, this one's harder to quantify, but you're going to make a lot of changes. Like, you're just going to be constantly adding new products, new process, new segments. How quickly can you move to that new segment? Like, how quickly do you get a win there? How quickly do you get people doing the behavior? I think that's a strong measurement of this team is very aligned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, right, what are maybe some of the mistakes you see being made too often, kind of as you go from 10 to 20 million in revenue?
I think it's sometimes overhire. It's it's this fine dance of overhiring and not hiring fast enough. I very much prefer, now that we've finally focused on efficiency, because before people just said you got to hire as many as possible. Don't worry, it'll all work its way out. I very much think it's from the 10 to 20, you have good people there, let them overachieve. Very much let them overachieve. And I think now that's becoming more common. Because back in the day, it's if the little's working, just hire a crap ton of people. Whereas now we're wait, these reps can actually do a lot more. It's more cost effective. And so it's nice to see the industry doing that. I will see, as an advisor, and what I see from the side is people bring their big company leader in at 10 million. And that person doesn't totally understand the agility, the culture building, the fact that going from 10 to 20 to 40, you still have to be reinventing yourself. You're still creating all these little 1 to 3s in there. As I find that person is much better at the scale side. And for some reason, everybody thinks they're going to go 10 to 100 million in a year or two. So they're like, I need my 100 million person. And it's no, you don't. You still need the it's just something the VCs always say is once you get over 10, you got to find that person who's seen 100 million. And it's no, because they're going to build that process a little too early. They're going to build that repetitive. They're just going to do what works really well and really harder, where they probably don't have that agility skill set involved. They don't realize that you just got to 20, guess what? You need to totally reinvent yourself. And they're like, what? I don't know how to do that. And I see a lot of those people not make it.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So right now, kind of going back to the reinventing yourself that you mentioned, right, with the box example of going from a very S&P heavy business to now moving up into enterprise. So you're at 20 million now, you have some processes in place. Now you need to double again to get to 40, 50 in a year. So what changes from here versus the 10 to 20 stage where it's still very agile and kind of starting to put structures in place?
Yeah, so that's where you do need your process has got to start to be tight. Because now you just have just a number of people you have on the team. You're entering new segments. You're how are we keeping the feedback loop across all these differing teams? It becomes way more about scaling culture. It becomes about process efficiencies that are going to get you there. It's how are you maintaining that feedback loop, but hitting those numbers is you also need to have some predictability now. It's those are bigger numbers. The stakes are much higher if you're going to miss, you need to know, because you got to be hiring a lot of people in front of that. So you have to start running like a legit company. That's why I really respected, like when I was at Box and Success Factors, at that point in time, we started bringing in some big company people to lead like these enterprise segments. And they just brought in these interesting learnings. You're like, oh, yeah, exactly. Like, of course we have to grow up a little bit and do that now. Like, why not? That makes tons of sense. Like, I can't believe we weren't doing that.
So that makes a lot of sense, right? Maybe what are some of the signals that are kind of, yes, 20 again is an arbitrary number, but what are some of the signals that you now have to, right, start to bring in or start to kind of think about this next chapter as a company?
I should have put this caveat first, because everything I'm talking about is assuming you're having like a sales-led business. So like humans are attached to revenue. Because, I think you have a self-service arm that's just like scaling. If you're open AI and you just turn around and you do $1 billion in revenue, it's like totally different, right?
Yeah,
Like all of these are assuming you have humans in it. You're like scaling salespeople. And so doing human-led revenue, I think the biggest thing is like once you have to generate over 20 million in 1 year is like, take some coordination. I think the best examples, when you're just, once again, let's go backwards. Like, we just need to find 2 million this year. You're like a little sailboat, you're like a little boat that just can stay super agile. And everybody, we're going this way, change the sail. We're going that way. And then you got to find 10. It's like, well, we need a little bigger boat. So like now I got to manage that. But now you need a crew. It's like, you got to find more than 20 million in 1 year. It's like so now you have directors, you probably have segments, you have like, let's just even, rough estimate, you're going to definitely have over 20 people. Like that's just like AEs, you probably have like 20, but you probably have some managers in there. So now you're over 20 people on the team. It's like, how do I make sure this stays coordinated? And what you don't factor in too is, okay, I'm going to produce 20 million of new this year, but next year I'm probably going to have to produce 40 million. So I'm going to have to start planning for that. And like sorry, I'm going in a million different tangents at once. But to answer your question, it becomes a scale of like, it's the number of people I need to coordinate to actually drive that revenue. And now my time horizon is more too. Because once over 20 million, it's like, the see what happened to me is, as a revenue leader, I need to start thinking like 2 years out. Because I need to start thinking, if we do 20 million this year, we're going to have to turn around and have to do 40 million of new next year. I'm going to need people in place. How many managers do I need to be in place? So you start doing capacity planning. It just becomes a more coordinated like motion. That like you still need some agility, but in order to hit those big numbers, like you have to be thinking that far out. You have to be doing your planning. You can't just like stumble into that number.
That makes sense. One of the things you also said, right, and kind of again, right, the Envoy example or the Box examples that you've mentioned is you now also have to go meaningfully wider, because right from 3 to 10 and 10 to 20, you're still kind of staying in similar swim lanes to where you started. But now again, you need to add 20 million in a single year, 40 million in the next year. You have to very meaningfully widen out whom you're going after. What all does that imply, kind of besides the people side of things, the hiring side of things?
Yeah. So getting into the people discussion.
Let's table that for now. Maybe just anything
Yeah.
beyond the people, right? We'll get into the people next.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, because that's exactly. And then, I've lived it at Box and Success Factors. I led it up to, close to past 30, like the early ones to myself. So I haven't had the driver's seat to know like what Jim Herbold was doing at Box. But you're exactly right. It's like what really starts to change is as you open it up, the company needs to start opening it up, but it's still the same thought, is that now each segment needs to go deep. Because for instance, when I was at Success Factors, we kept going bigger. We had an SMB segment, but then we created a small segment, a mid-market segment. And then in the mid-market segment, you realize there were specific verticals that were a better fit in the mid-market segment. We even moved to geographic territories. Because what you want to make sure is like, it's still getting that focus. Like no matter what, you're not thinking super broad. But I said, like at Envoy, the like alignment, the rallying cry So I would say every AE is the CEO of their geo. So like that was a way for them to still think small, but I really needed them to like, what's the, if you have Houston, you're probably going after oil and gas companies. Like if you have San Francisco, you're probably hitting up more like startup-y software companies. So to that size is you need to be coordinated, but now you still need to be focusing into your specific area.
So right, if we now rewind, 0 to 1, you throw everything at the wall, see what sticks. 1 to 3, you go very narrow. 3 to 10, you open it up a little bit. 10 to 20, you open it up a little bit more and put processes around it. And then kind of 20 and beyond, you really start to scale. You really start to open it up while also going deeper. Now, all of that also has a lot of implications on the people side of things. So maybe right before we dive into kind of what does this mean on the people side for the different stages, you told me that there are 3 types of people that you can hire at a startup. Maybe quickly explain what those 3 type of people are.
Yeah, I can't take credit for this. There was a person named Steve McMahon at SuccessFactors who came in to run HR, and it stuck with me forever though, because it's so true. Because during this journey, you're going to have startup people. These are the people who just like love building. They love nothing. They love risk. They love wearing a bunch of hats, and they just want to figure it out. And then you will move into I call them like your growth scale people. But these are the people that's like, great, I don't want to be first. Those startup people de-risked it, but I still like to be early. And they come in and they love taking something that's working and it's like, okay, well, how do we do more of this? They're the ones who are going to help build the process. They're the ones that are going to help like find those next segments. They're the ones that are going to help with the systems, and they will help find that repeatability. And then the final group is you're going to find your maturity. These are the people that when you hire them, you say, here's how we do things. And they're like, I'm going to do that better than anybody else here. It's like, I am so good at crushing that like, just give me my patch, give me my playbook. I will go like find revenue for you. And you're like, great. Those are like your maturity people. You're like, perfect. Here you go. You're off to the races. And the thing about that spectrum is most people fall in one of those categories. Some people will span 2. Nobody spans all 3.
Well, that's fascinating. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
let's now apply that right to different stages. So 0 to 1 is all founder led. How should I think about hiring when I want to go from 1 to 3 million?
Yeah, you want that startup person. You want they're entrepreneurial. They're great with chaos. They love risk. They want to do something with nothing. And these are the people I love hiring.
So right, which is a great segue. Where do I find these people and how do I kind of test for that startup skill set as I'm hiring?
Oh God, it's so hard. Sorry, a little tangent. Now there's this guy, Ian Finney, is actually like started a recruiting agency to help find these people. And he's doing a pretty good job. So like it used to be like, I think no matter what, I contact Ian, but these were the ones you'd meet a lot through the VCs. Like you'd meet a lot through your network because they were the ones who were entrepreneurial, that were finding their way to VCs and just like wanted to learn about the startup ecosystem. And maybe they've tinkered with like some app of their own. Like those are the ones. And the question I typically ask these people is, give me your best entrepreneurial story. Is when have you taken something from nothing? Which is a weird question to ask a salesperson. And I say like, yeah, and I say your whole life. Like this doesn't have to be a work story, but give me an example of when you've created something from nothing. And I've got so many amazing answers throughout the years. And that's when is the person who lights up when you ask them the story and they get pretty passionate about something they did from nothing. That's the person you want. And you'll also find too, is that's the person who's like there for the equity and not there for the salary.
No, that makes a lot of sense. How do I think about seniority levels this early on when I look for entrepreneurial people?
In what sense? Like,
Are they kind of very one would think that these tend to be more junior, kind of icy type of people versus someone who's right who's done this a bunch and managed a bunch of people. Like, how do you think about the seniority level of that specific person? Or it can be that it doesn't really matter, right? It's much more about the type of person that it is.
I think typically, like, this is a generic statement, like, typically these people are young and they're hungry and they haven't really done much, and you're like, "Great, you got a crap ton to prove." But I also think it's just, yeah, it's a mindset.
Right. So we 1 to 3 million. Now we're trying to go from 3 to 10. How does that change how I think about my hiring?
Yeah, here's where you're gonna want, like, it's some of the people that are gonna help you build that repeatable process. So you're gonna want some people from that next phase. And when I think about this is you're gonna want a balance because you're still reinventing yourself and there's still so much you need to learn. Is I still index more on the entrepreneurial type. Maybe you're like a 70-30, 80-20 type split between, skewed more towards the entrepreneurial startup type versus the like growth process people. When you're sub 10, I will give you an example at Intercom. I I hired just the entrepreneurial startup people like past 10. So the whole team was just like startup entrepreneurial, which was like super fun. And that's why we just like made anything work. But we're like, crap, who's gonna like, and nobody wanted to do the process stuff. Nobody wanted to have the infrastructure. And then also I get to a point I'd be like, okay, we figured it out. Can you just do more of that? And they were like busy trying to reinvent it. I'm like, no, 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 just do just do the thing. And I fixed that at Envoy. I made a better balance. I hired a better balance at Envoy. It was a much better constructed team as we did it at Envoy.
Are there certain type of signals or that they kind of beyond just revenue that kind of tell you that it's now time to bring in someone who's or start to bring in people that are more kind of growth process scale type people versus the entrepreneurial ones?
I think it's still revenue. It's still because it's like we talked about earlier. It's still the chaos, right? It's like leading indicator. These people's calendars are spilling over, and the entrepreneurial type are great at like figuring that out and making the calendar spill over. But they're probably not the best at like, well, what if we used a different? What if we tweak the sales, the CRM a little bit more, or like use this new tool, or like so that's when I still think it's the leading indicator, the good chaos of like spillover calendars. You're not following up fast enough. And if that's the thing, and then also it depends on like if you're doing a huge like widening out. Because I'll give you an example at Box. Like what Box did very well is like the first 16 reps there were all entrepreneurial. They were great. It was such a talented crew. They've all gone on and just done amazing things. But as we went and did the SMB to enterprise, is they took the two best like entrepreneurial reps and they're like, you two go figure out enterprise. And so they got to like continue doing that like startup-y feeling. Whereas as we built out the SMB segment, it was like, we need process people now. It's like, this thing works. We need process people now. So spilling over, and we're like, we don't need to innovate that segment. We're like, we just want to put it on repeat.
Now, same question again. Where do I find these people and how do I best test for that specific skill set or person?
Yeah, you're going to find, and people explain their day to day. One of the questions, so let's answer the where do you find them? I typically work through recruiters. So I think your network gets you so far. And I also just like diversity. When I say diversity, it's like, I don't want just a bunch of people who've always worked for me. Cause like we tend to like do the same things. Like I want different experiences. I want different thoughts. I want, different demographics. And I find a good way to do that is the recruiters. Like in the sales world is you'll find recruiters and recruiters know these different type of people. And you can tease it out pretty fast. Cause like I said, your startup people are going to ask you way more product questions. They're going to be really trying to figure it out. Whereas like more of your process people, and how I interviewed them is I was like, tell me how you organize yourself. And they'll because organization is a key skill set of that next person, because they need to be able to do more what efficiency hacks do they find? And now, of course, they still need to hit their number, and they still need to be getting through everything. But they also were probably earlier in a company too. And when things got too repetitive, they're bored. They're this just isn't fun anymore. Yeah, sorry, really quickly. What I was very successful with is those startup-y people I used to hire from failed startups. Now everybody's oh, I want the first rep at so-and-so. It's guess what? That person doesn't want to do that again. And so I would look for people that figured out how to sell a product at a failed startup. So I'm oh my God, if you could sell that, imagine what you could do with this. So I actually tried to find people that sell at companies that didn't make it. And then what I liked for those efficiency people, process builders, are the ones that kind of came from the brand names you've heard of, but were early. And that things have just gotten bigger and they're I don't like it here anymore. It's great. Look, this thing's de-risked. You're going to be making money here. And I need you to figure out all of the scale stuff. And they're typically awesome. That's what I love doing.
That's fascinating. Now, right, I'm at 10 million, trying to go to 20. How do I change my mix type of people or anything from here?
Yeah, here's where you're going to want to start. Now you find the third is they just love, they're hey, is everything built? Great. And these are your competitive, they know how to grind it out. They're going to make it happen. And they like their playbook. And they just tell me what it is. I'll go do it better than anybody else. You got to start sprinkling them in.
Just to clarify, is it at 10 or is it at 20 million where you actually start to bring on the growth and scale people?
I think once you go over 10, you can start finding these people and adding them in. Once you get over 20, you're definitely going to want more of these people.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, right? How do I balance kind of throughout that journey, the kind of entrepreneurial versus growth scale people versus eventually, right, the kind of the maturity folks, kind of as you think about it, because they are ultimately quite different people and they probably don't necessarily always work well together.
No. So this is something the people who have done this journey know. And I've done this enough time that I will take the startup people, because they're brilliant, great salespeople, but all of a sudden they're not doing super well anymore. And you just need to have that honest conversation of do you really want to work at the company in its current state? That listen, now you have an assigned geo and I need you to do that in the SMB segment. And they're remember when I had everything was round robin and I had everything and I could do it. And I was the salesperson, the marketing person, everything. It's yeah, but that's not the company now. So do you want to be here in its current state? It's no fault of their own, but you just need to have that conversation. And you need to so what I've done is two things. I'll either be let me help you get a job at a startup that's earlier stage. You're going to be happier. I know enough people. Totally fine. Or can you find other jobs for them to do? Because my first hire, Joe Ryan at Intercom, he's the best. And he was your very classic startup person that come from a failed startup, came in, helped figure everything out, and was starting to get bored. I was how'd you like to help build out the Dublin sales team? He's put me on a plane. Great. He went and did that. And he's huh. And it's all right, what do you want to do next? Hey, do you want to help us build out our sales engineering motion? He's great. Yeah, I'll do that. It's perfect. So I keep giving him new things to figure out. Even as things at scale and I was starting to bring in the maturity people, he was still giving an amazing impact. But I didn't have him in a role of great, Joe, now your patch is Minnesota and SMB, good luck. Because he would not have doing that, and I would not have gotten the leverage out of him that I would have wanted.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, right, to take a sec back again, kind of 1 to 3, only entrepreneurial people, 3 to 10, you start to sprinkle in the growth scale people. 10 to 20, you start to kind of balance it out and introduce the first maturity people, and then at 20, entrepreneurial folks start to phase out if you can't put them in new seats, and you really start to kind of bring in more and more of the maturity people. Now, how do I, right, if kind of anything different, but how does kind of sales leadership fit into this journey and profile? And when do we even introduce, right, kind of sales leadership versus just kind of, right, ICs that go out and get stuff done?
Yeah. Okay, so here's my thought. Is 0 to 1 founder. Like, this has got to be founder. If you want to bring in like a junior salesperson to work with you, okay, well, here's the true advice I give to everybody. I believe 0 to 1 should be all founder. And now I understand, like, it depends on the founder skill set and everything, but because it's not really sales. So many times the founder thinks 0 to 1, I need to learn sales. Like, no, you don't. You need to find like the true pain. And if you find the true pain, the product will basically start selling itself. And like, that means you have something. So I always say from 0 to 1 should be founder. Now, as you get close to 1, we could do rounding. Is the best advice is go hire two salespeople. And those 2 salespeople should have some experience. Because like, they shouldn't need management, because you as the founder is not going to know how to manage them. So like, don't hire somebody too junior where they actually need management. But don't hire somebody too experienced. But it's finding those 2 great entrepreneurial. They'll know how to like help you set up a CRM. They'll know how to sniff out like repeatability. And they don't need to be managed. Like, that's the key. And I always say too, is like, with those first 2, it's just hire people you like. Because they are representing you because you're the brand. And like, make sure you like them. Don't just hire them from some logo and you're like, so-and-so said I should. It's like, if you don't get along with this person, like, don't hire them. And then I think the founder could probably manage up to like 4 AEs. It depends. Because it depends how fast things are moving. But what I would really say is, once you get to like 4, you should think about bringing in a sales leader. And for that first sales leader, is like, once again, this can have to be your entrepreneurial person, because they need to be total entrepreneurial, scrappy, roll up the sleeves. You don't need a bunch of dashboards. It's like, they're going to really have to figure it out. They're going to have to think the profile. They're going to have to think through hiring. They're going to have to think through what is 3 to 9 going to look like. They're also going to have to make sure you get to 3. And so you bring your sales leader, I think, which got about 3, 4 AEs, because then you might need SDRs. Maybe you need some SE. Like, this person can help you manage across that. Depending on your business, maybe they're looking after success. We won't get into that much like nuance. And so now that person can probably manage up to 8 people. And then what I recommend is, once you get to about 8 people, that first leader is going to have to hire 2 managers. And so some people at this stage, and it varies, but some people at this stage will hire over that first. This is what kind of happens at the 9, because now all of a sudden this person that was like a good sales manager now needs to manage managers. And like,
Very
things
different
open
skill
up.
set.
It's a very different skill set. And can they grow fast enough? And so that's a decision point you'll need to have, is like, can this person manage managers? And this depends on the person, but that's where you'll see, like, they'll bring in a sales leader to manage, because that once you get to 8, you're going to need 2 managers, because those 2 managers are going to have to scale their teams out. And then maybe you need like an SDR manager. So maybe now you have like 3 managers. And like, as the founder, you're not going to want to manage those 3 managers. You're going to want somebody to like manage those people. So now you need that person who's going to take you to that 20 million plus. So not only are they going to have to like navigate that like 3 to 9, 9 to 10, 9 to 20, probably going to have to push you into like the 20 to 40. And so that's why the mistake I see a lot is people reach, because they're like, I need somebody who can manage managers. So they go find a big company person who doesn't know how to get them to like 10 or 20. They don't realize how scrappy that stage is.
And that makes a lot of sense. How do you think about, right, when you kind of have 4 AEs? So how do you think about promoting one of them to lead the pack versus bringing in someone who actually has management experience already?
Yeah, I made all the let's not call them mistakes. I learned a lot of interesting lessons at Intercom because my first 4 managers were all first-time managers, promoted from within, or even people that had worked for me before. I'm like, "Just get over here. Like, this is gonna be great." And then I realized my job was just teaching them how to be managers. I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, I need to be thinking like, how the hell are we gonna get to 50,000,000? How the hell am I planning like 18 months out, but I have to train these managers on how to be managers." And so what I like doing now, and we did this at Envoy, is I promoted 1 manager from within and brought 1 manager external so they could help each other. And then I made sure to hire once I had 2 managers, I immediately went and grabbed a director, Justin, who I knew would be good at helping these managers learn how to manage. Even though he had never managed managers before, but I'm like, I just knew he would be good at making sure they became good managers. And so I knew that it's such a critical jump point that I had lived through at Intercom that like promote everybody from within, which is nice. You definitely want to, but you just got to factor in that they don't really know how to do that job. And how much do you want to spend your time training them on how to do that job?
That makes a lot of sense. So now maybe right, we talked about a whole lot of themes and topics and everything. Taking a step back, kind of in a very short answer, what were, if you had to summarize your major learnings from this process, or maybe biggest mistakes, what are maybe the top 3 things that come to mind as you think back about kind of doing this multiple times, both yourself and then through advising companies?
Yeah, I think because we talked and I've been thinking about this a lot. I think the number one thing is agility. I think you just have to be agile because even when I did this at Intercom and then I went to do it again at Envoy and we were sub 10, is I started doing things like we were a 20 million plus company. I was like, no, 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 we can't do that now because it's not going to scale. That's going to get us in trouble later. I was like, no, 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 we got to build for that. And then revenue actually started going down. And it's when I realized you have to be agile. Like you have to hire the right people that are going to be agile with you. And I was like, well, you got to do things that don't scale. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like we have to do all these things and we're not going to get to 10. So like, who cares about scale? Who cares about what this is going to mean like when we're at 20? It's like we have to get to 10. So just do all of the dumb things. Keep reinventing yourself. Like don't worry about doing too much of a discount. Like just acquire the customer. Like just be scrappy. Like don't do it. And I think everything is really the agility. It's just realizing like you don't know what you don't know. That's why I think a lot of people when they're doing it the first time are so great. Because at Intercom, I didn't know any better. I was like, I don't know. And then I get Envoy, it became dangerous because like I know how this is gonna go. Whereas now it's like, who cares? Let's go. Like, let's wild, wild west. Like, let's just be at like totally make mistakes. Like, who cares? Like things should totally break. Like, just because I've seen it before, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna come in and break things. And like chaos is good because you have to. Too many people have read all these stories and they're like, well, I need to be thinking about when I'm at 10. It's like, no, you need to get to 3. You need to do whatever it takes to get to 3. And then you need to do whatever it takes to get to 9. And don't think about what the hell past 10 is going to look like. And I do think like that is the biggest lesson is staying agile, getting the right people. And then I do what I've seen too much is, people try and widen this thing up. They prematurely scale. They try and be too many things to too many people. Where it's like you just got to narrow this thing down, which like not enough people like. It's all written. I mean, there's books where everybody says it. It's hilarious how many people like just don't follow it.
That's fascinating. Maybe kind of partially in line with that. Um, Something you said earlier was big company people don't know how to reinvent themselves every 18 months. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge generalization, right? But if you think about it, when you're at a big company, what is your job? Your job is to keep doing what's working. Is like execute, make sure everybody's aligned, making sure everybody's doing the thing. because like that's the stage you're at. Whereas at a startup, you got to execute and do the thing really well. And then you got to be like, that was great. Let's blow it up. And now we're going to do something different. And they don't really have that agility muscle of like, oh my God, now I need to totally reinvent myself. Like all those things that got me here, I need to just not do that anymore. It's like, yeah, it's fun. And they're like, no, that's crazy. Why would I do that? I'm just going to do it harder. Like, I'll just do it harder.
That makes a lot of sense. And then one more statement that stuck with me. You told me acronyms are all crap. Tell me more.
Yeah, that's what we did in the pre-briefing. I hate acronyms. I think everybody does it to create some market for themselves, which is a genius marketing thing. And then it makes you seem smarter because like you're in the know. I know what these things, I know what it means and I'm in the know. But it typically is just some rebranding of something we've done before. And the example, and I know when we talked about it, is the one I love today is PLG. And I was like, oh, PLG. It's like, dude, this isn't new. Like, you guys didn't just invent PLG. And I laugh because my dad's been in tech since 1969. And when I was at Box, because we were doing freemium, that's what we used to call it before the acronym PLG existed. And we were doing self-service in freemium, which we thought we were like pioneering it. And my dad's like, we gave software away in the 80s. You used to like use part of the software for free, and then you had to call us to get the like serial number to like use the next version. He's like, you guys didn't invent it. It's like been there forever. And then nowadays, was like, well, we're going to be a PLG company. It's like, what the hell does that mean? Like, I just hate. And I'll give you another funny story. When I was at ServiceMax a long time ago, there was me and one of my coworkers, Nick Lasaros. We would make fun of acronyms so much that when we were doing cold calling and when we were doing sales calls, we would make up acronyms and like see if we could get the customer saying it. And almost every time, like the customer would just start repeating back the acronym. And we're like, this is ridiculous. It's just so funny how like, because people think it makes them seem smarter and they're like, now I'm in the know. Now I'm going to start saying this. It's like, just say what the thing is. It's okay to abbreviate things, but now like PLG motions and trade shows and all of that, it's like, all right, it's fine.
That's fascinating. So to wrap things up, 3 quick kind of closing questions. First one being, what popular advice that is often given to startup founders or operators do you disagree with, and why?
Yeah, I think domain experience is overrated. I think too many times people's like, well, I need somebody who sold HR software for their career and understands HR software. And I think that's overrated. I think as a founder, it's like, sure, you need to know the domain, like, because that's probably where you found the pain. Like, that makes sense. But like as a sales leader or a business or a go-to-market person, you need somebody that's really good at sales. You need somebody that's really good at business. Like, that's the hard part. That's the skill set. Just because they know the nuances of like HR doesn't mean. And we found this at Success Factors. All the early reps we hired from big companies, and they had all come from like HR software backgrounds. None of them made it. All of the best reps were people like me and like other ones that were young, didn't know anything, but like were super agile, quick learners, naturally curious, and we all figured it out.
What's a piece of advice you give to someone who's thinking about starting a company or has recently started one?
I do think like YC nails it. It's like, just build something people love. Like, you can't overestimate how hard it is to find that pain that people truly care about. And even in my own journey, like, it's so hard to find pain. Like, I mistook people complaining, and then you just get too excited about building something, and you're like, look, I built something. And then let me explain it to you in a market sense. It's like, no, it is just all about finding a pain. Like, you have to find a true pain that people are willing to use it and pay money for. And finding that true pain takes time. Like, it just takes time. And that is everything. And that's like the advice, and what I learned is like, wow, it's hard to really find that pain.
And then the last one, right? Because as a VC investor, I'm always curious to ask and kind of learn from others. Can you give me a specific example of something, right, very impactful and thoughtful that a VC's done for you, your business or business you've been involved with that stuck with you?
Yeah, I mean, the investors I had in my own startup were amazing. I really appreciated the expat team. I joined their accelerator, and I kind of came from like this big scale up like revenue person, and they were the ones that were like beating it over my head with the pain. And they were so that they're like, oh my gosh, if we could just find you something that's moving, like we know you could take it. But like getting to the pain was, but they were so understanding, so thoughtful, just like great thought partners, just went way above and beyond. And I also had another great like initial investor, Rob Go at NextView, just like so human, even like going through this phase, like I think you hear too much about VCs, like, well, if you're not going, they just like stop returning your calls. Whereas like Rob, like just, as the journey was going down, I wasn't going to make it. Like, it just looked like he was so thoughtful. Just like, how could I be here? Like, just really being that like human sounding board of all the actual like emotional side of like starting a company. Like, it's not all strategic. Like, there's throwing your whole livelihood into this thing. And he was just so like thoughtful. And so I just like I'm always with them, like whatever you guys ever need. Like they were so, and I know there's lots of good VCs out there. So those are just ones who invested in me. And I was very thankful for it.
I appreciate that.